1.
Good evening and aloha, everyone. This is Jackie Conant in the Honolulu District Office of U.S. Congressman Ed Case. We welcome those of you who are joining us for the first time, and we welcome back all those who have joined us in the past. Tonight, Congressman Case will update you on the federal response to the American Rescue Plan, crisis of COVID-19, and other issues of critical importance to our Hawaii and our country. We promise a start time of 6:30 tonight, and we will go on with tonight's event until 8 o'clock tonight, as Congressman Case is in Washington, D.C. You're also invited to the live stream on the Congressman's official website at case.house.gov. Go to his special link that says Teletalk Story. Yes, that live stream page will say the event starts at 12:30 a.m., but that's East Coast time. For those of you who may be tuning into the event on his website and want to join in the conversation, you can do so by dialing this number, 855-274-9528. Again, that number is 855-274-9528. For those of you who are in the system, the way to put a question to the Congressman is to simply dial *3 on your phone. Again, *3 on your phone. Again, that number to participate in tonight's event, call 855-274-9528, 855-274-9528, and to ask a question, dial *3. Thank you, and I'm turning it over here to Congressman Ed Case. Congressman?
Mahalo, Jackie, and to each and all of the folks listening out there, good evening and aloha. I'm Congressman Ed Case, and I am coming to you from my office on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Yes, it is a little late here. In fact, it's early Tuesday morning our time. When I first scheduled this talk story, I had expected to be in Hawaii and then leave that night to come back for our next session here in Congress, which starts tomorrow. However, late last week, I had the opportunity to visit our southern border in Mexico and the Rio Grande River with several of my colleagues to review our immigration crisis there. And so I left 2 days ago and have been 2 days on the border absorbing all of what that crisis really represents to our country and discussing it with my colleagues. I just got back to Washington, D.C., and thus the late hour for me. This is another of my Teletalk stories to stay in touch with you. I have done these regularly. I wish I could do this in person, as I love to do the in-person talk stories with you throughout my district, but that is still not possible because of COVID-19, and thus we are doing another Teletalk story. I'm going to talk for, I hope, 20, 25 minutes, and then I'm going to go straight to your questions. As Jackie already pointed out, to ask me a question, just press *3, and you'll be put in the queue. Or you can call my office at 808-650-6688, or you can visit my website, as Jackie already pointed out, at case.house.gov and go to the Teletalk Story tab. These are the ways to get in touch so that I can hear from you directly. There's no moderator. Please, of course, let's have the conversation that we all want in our Washington, D.C., a straightforward civil conversation among fellow citizens to decide what the best way forward is for our country. As an overview, on January 3rd of this year, which was exactly 100 days ago today, the 117th Congress commenced. Our Congresses go in 2-year cycles. This is the 2-year Congress that just started. These Congresses date back 117 Congresses to the first 2 years of the presidency of George Washington. So this is part of our long tradition of democratic rule, and we commenced it in early January. On January 6th, we certified the election results for the presidential election of 2020, and I sat in my office as our Capitol was assaulted. On January 20th, I sat on the west front of the Capitol as President Biden was inaugurated, honoring one of our most long-standing traditions. On January 29th, our country marked the first anniversary of the first death here from COVID-19, and on February 22nd, we mark the tragic anniversary of 500,000 of our fellow citizens having passed away from COVID-19. All of which to say is that the last 100 days have been a very, very difficult start to what was going to be a very difficult Congress anyway. And these days have been very, very full of difficult decisions to try to advance our country and our Hawaii. My job throughout all of this has been 4 buckets, I would call them. The first bucket, make the best possible decisions I can for our country, to work with my colleagues, with our president, with you, to try to formulate the best ways forward for our country. I am part of a separate, independent, and co-equal branch of government. I am not accountable to the President of the United States or anybody else other than to you. That's the way it was set up. But I do try very much to work with whoever I can to find the best ways forward for our country and to fulfill my constitutional duties as a member of Congress. These challenges are both domestic and foreign, but they are all serious challenges, and we face many of them all at the same time. In the second bucket, my job is to make sure that our federal government is working for us in Hawaii. That's a little different from trying to find the best decisions for our entire country, although there's a lot of overlap many times. For example, our country's role in the Indo-Pacific impacts not only our country but our Hawaii very much. But this part of my job is just making sure that our federal government is taking care of things for our Hawaii. Easier said than done sometimes, because we're a very unique state, place in our country, and sometimes our federal government means well but doesn't exactly do the right things in terms of how to help us. Number 3, my job is to help you with your individual concerns. I'll get into that a little bit later on, what we sometimes call casework or constituent services, but that's to help you with what's on your mind in your life. And overlaying all of this is to stay in touch with you wherever, whenever, and however I can, because I think it is so critical that I do that as I confront all of these areas of responsibility on your behalf. I need to stay in touch with you. I need to tell you what I'm doing. I need to listen to you. We need to compare notes. We need to talk. We need to try to find the best ways forward together. Throughout the last year plus, my first priority has been and will remain COVID-19. COVID-19 is a terrible, of course, crisis that we have all faced together through the last 13 plus months at this point. It is all of a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and a social and a community crisis. And our federal government has been a key component in helping us all through all parts of that crisis. In fact, I would say that no institution in our entire world, other than our federal government, could have, would have, or should have really pitched in on behalf of all of us. It's our government to helping us all through a crisis that was so completely unexpected and so devastating throughout our country. In the course of the last year plus, we have passed in Congress, and the President has signed 3 major emergency assistance packages and several more assistance packages dealing with COVID-19. Many of these are familiar to each and all of you, but I'm going to just summarize them very quickly. We started in March 2020 with the CARES Act. That was a $2.2 trillion emergency assistance package that sent federal assistance to several areas of our government, our economy, and our society. We aided our state and local governments with their very, very severe and devastating budget needs in the face of COVID-19. And we all know that in Hawaii, we were one of the most severely impacted of all states, all local governments throughout our entire country, primarily because of the impact of COVID-19 on our travel and tourism industry. We sent aid to our businesses throughout the country, especially our small businesses. Many of our small businesses, tens of thousands in Hawaii, were able to take advantage of much of that business aid to try to tide them through really the worst of the COVID-19 crisis last summer and into the fall. We sent a first of 3 direct stimulus payments to most Americans to help them out with their own bills and immediate financial needs. And then finally, we added a federal supplement to state unemployment benefits. Unemployment is a state program. It is not administered by the federal government. It has been, as we all know, a very deep disappointment in terms of the backlog in the state unemployment office. The contribution from the federal government has been both assistance in administering state unemployment claims, but also in a federal supplement that was, I believe, very much needed by many of our families and fellow citizens. We followed that in December of last year, December 2020, with a $900 billion emergency assistance package, which was really to add to most of those buckets, which were running dry as COVID-19 lasted much longer than any of us hoped and believed as we went into COVID-19 in the spring and the summer of 2020. We also provided specific assistance to some of our businesses, for example, our shuttered venues, which are very important in Hawaii, although that assistance has been highly problematic in getting started up, and we have many businesses that are waiting for that assistance. And then just a few weeks ago, in February of 2021, we passed the American Rescue Plan, our third major emergency assistance package at about $1.9 trillion. We added to each and all of those buckets all over again, state and local government funding, including about $2.2 billion to the state of Hawaii and to all of our counties. We added a significant amount back again to our small business programs, direct stimulus payments, and unemployment benefits. And we tried to add much more to the public health side of the COVID-19 crisis, in particular, the effort to increase the manufacture and the distribution to the states and throughout the states of a vaccination for COVID-19, because I hope and believe that we all agree at this point that the real answer to coming through COVID-19, the single most important answer to COVID-19, is widespread vaccination. And our federal government has tried to contribute not only the vaccine, which is being provided essentially free to our states and to our citizens throughout the country and throughout Hawaii, as well as a transport to the states. But then once it arrives in the states, the distribution itself is up to the states, but we have tried to assist at the federal government level with not only the actual logistics of distributing that vaccine widely throughout our state, but in educating people, because we have found that although many people understand very well the realities of what the vaccine can do and the risks of contracting COVID-19 versus the benefits of being vaccinated, there are still many parts of our community that are not as connected as many of us are to sources of information, and who are skeptical for one reason or another, and who we need to reach in very tailored ways to be able to provide the information with which to make an informed decision on vaccination. So that was a critical part of the American Rescue Plan. All of this added up to somewhere in the range of $17 billion to Hawaii to date, and several billion more coming as all of these bills still are delivering aid to our state. That's a huge amount, and I think was instrumental in really avoiding what absent that assistance would have been far worse than, of course, what we encountered, which was bad enough, given that although we had one of the best public health results in our country, seriously up at the top 3 throughout the entire year. That came at great sacrifice as we followed, for the most part, public health guidelines and I think made the right decisions in terms of the science of COVID-19, as difficult as they were, but came at a huge cost from an economic and social level, as we probably had the second or third worst economic result in the country, and the first in some of those months. So top 3 on both sides. And so this aid was critical, and we will probably need more. We don't know where COVID-19 is going. We know that we have seen a resurgence, a very troubling resurgence on the mainland. Many parts of the mainland, we have certainly seen an increase in our tourism numbers. It would be, reasonable to conclude that with that kind of an increase in Hawaii, in terms of the number of people in Hawaii, that we would be at some higher risk. We've seen some of those numbers turn up in recent weeks. That's very troubling. And we will need to watch this very carefully and make sure that we don't go in the direction of some of our sister states who have not been as vigilant as we have. And so this money has been well spent, but it's not over. We need to get through this together with this additional assistance. Although COVID-19 has dominated most of my time over the last year plus, there are other priorities that are coming down the pike right now, and that I've been pursuing on a parallel path because life does go on, business does go on, the affairs of our country do go on, whether COVID-19 is upon us or not. One of the huge issues that we are now dealing with in Congress is the President's proposed American Jobs Plan, which is a generational investment in our infrastructure throughout our country. That is intended both as exactly what it sounds like, a generational investment in infrastructure that has been crumbling in many, many parts of our country, but also to stabilize our economy coming out of a very shaky impact from COVID-19. We are debating this very vigorously in Congress right now. We have the question of exactly how much, exactly where to allocate it, under what conditions. This would be infrastructure that would be, at the end of the day, very, very helpful to Hawaii in many, many areas, not only our traditional infrastructure, such as our roads and harbors and bridges and airports and sewers, but other parts of our infrastructure, such as healthcare, schools, broadband. These are areas where we desperately do need the help, and the Americans Jobs Plan would provide that. It's just making the right decisions on exactly what that looks like. Other federal issues that I have dealt with, and there have been many, many other issues, but I'm just going to highlight a few just as examples. Number one, I have been a very strong proponent for years now of what we now refer to as H.R. 1, the very first bill introduced into the U.S. House, the For the People Act, which is the most far-reaching government reform proposal in literally a generation. It would do so many things. It would fight voter suppression, such as we now see happening in many, many of our sister states. It would simplify voting, which we know from our last experience in 2020 in Hawaii was very, very successful in increasing voter participation, and which many of our sister states are busy trying to obstruct at this point. It would promote election security. I think we are all concerned to make sure that our elections are secure and safe. And finally, to curb special interest and dark money in politics, which subverts the influence of we the people so much and turns our government into really a captive of special interest in too many situations. Another area that is upon us, given my trip, especially relevant to my trip to the U.S.-Mexico border over the last 2 days, has been immigration reform. Our immigration system is in crisis right now, as I saw that firsthand on the border. I think we all believe that we want strong immigration for our country. Certainly, immigration for our Hawaii has made us strong. We have one of the highest rates of immigration in our entire country, and a very, very proud heritage of immigration to our Hawaii. But we also want that strength of immigration. We want it to be secure. We want to be able to secure our borders. We want to be able to enforce our laws. And finally, we need to find paths to citizenship, fair paths to citizenship for those that are deserving of citizenship who have been here for a long period of time, particularly the Dreamers, as they are known. In foreign affairs, I'm very involved in foreign affairs, especially with the Indo-Pacific. We are the center of the Indo-Pacific, the capital, whether you want to take that from an economic perspective or a cultural perspective, and certainly for our military and our defense efforts in our country, Hawaii is the center. And not only is that the case, not only are we at the forefront of our country's efforts in this Pacific century, given especially the rise of and problem of China, but our military is our number 2 economic generator. And I would say here that over the last year, it has been our number one economic generator, as travel and tourism has been significantly hit by COVID-19. In fact, if we had not had our military in place over the last year contributing to our local economy, we would have been in such a deep world of hurt in addition to what we saw that I think it begs us to step back and again recognize the value of supporting our military fairly where we can, as a good neighbor in our Hawaii and as a host for our country's efforts and needs in the Indo-Pacific. In this regard, I have been working on a bill which I introduced in the last Congress, which would be, again, a generational improvement in our country's relationship with the islands of the Pacific. These parts of our ohana, whether they be our compact countries such as Micronesia or areas that are connected with other countries such as French Polynesia, Tahiti, etc., or independent countries such as Fiji and Samoa. These are parts of our ohana, and our country has not always been attentive to their needs, and they have been dire needs, especially during COVID-19 and during a time of climate change, which is far more acute for these countries than many, many other parts of the world. The Blue Pacific Act, as we call it, would provide that reinvestment by our country in the relationship that we have with the Pacific and in assisting our neighbors, all towards providing for a partnership of friends and allies throughout the Pacific as we go forward. And then finally, I would mention the environment, which is a passion of mine as well as many throughout Hawaii. In particular, my passion is the oceans because our oceans are in real crisis. And in all honesty, not a lot of my colleagues in Congress know as much as many of us in Hawaii about our oceans. And so there's an area there that is crying out for some leadership in terms of working with other countries, working within our own country to protect and preserve our oceans as part of our natural environment. That goes hand in hand with climate change, which we are also very acutely aware of in Hawaii. We see it happening every day on our coastlines, and I have definitely tried to work on climate change along with our oceans and the linkage between them. In terms of assisting Hawaii itself, it's been all about COVID-19 for the most part in the last year. I try especially to help Hawaii through my membership, my continued membership on the Committee on Appropriations, which is our funding committee. That committee is the committee that decides where federal funds are going to be allocated throughout our government at about $1.4 trillion per year. So it's an important committee. It's a committee that is at the center of things in Washington and in Congress, since everything pretty much has to flow through that committee. And it also gives me the opportunity to try to amplify those programs that are of a special benefit to Hawaii. I also serve on the Natural Resources Committee, which is part of my focus on the environment. In that area, I have pursued efforts to protect our natural resources throughout Hawaii, not just the oceans, but to provide the first ever national forest for Hawaii, as well as the first ever national heritage areas for Hawaii. In terms of assisting you, again, what we call constituent services or casework, this is pretty much anything you need help with, any question you have, especially, of course, about government and about your interactions with our government. I am your federal government, but we still can refer you and answer your questions about areas that may be state and local government related. At least we can tell you where to go. But where it does impact your federal government, I am particularly willing and able to assist. The areas where this tends to come in the most in my office is Social Security benefits and questions, federal taxation benefits or benefits in question. I'm not sure there's much benefit to federal taxation, but we try to answer your questions. And then immigration, which has been, not as much of a question during COVID-19 because we have not had as much immigration, but many of our fellow citizens have questions as to immigration with their friends and family overseas. Fundamentally, bottom line, whatever you need help with, please contact my office. And how to do that? Well, there's a number of ways you can stay in touch with me, what I'm up to, and to seek assistance and ask questions. The easiest way is through case.house.gov. That's the fast lane into my office. Check it out. There's lots of information on COVID-19 and other things. My voting record is there. Try to run a transparent office, tell you exactly what I'm doing and why. You can also ask me those questions, and I try to get back to you with what's going on and why. In terms of your particular question, we answered somewhere in the range of close to 100,000 constituent questions during the last 116th Congress along these lines. Social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you can access all of that off of case.house.gov. You can call me again. I try to meet with anybody that I represent that wants to meet with me. Of course, that's a problem during COVID-19, but if you or your organizations would like to spend some time with me, I'll try to set that up. We will be happy to help you with your events, maybe a congratulatory message to somebody on a special occasion, whatever it might be. If you think about it, we will try to find a way to help you, because the core of this office is service. We are here to serve our country, we're here to serve our state, and we're here to serve you. And so in that spirit, that's my quick report to you. I went about 25 minutes there, so right about on time. And now what I want to do is to turn it over to you for your questions. If you could please kindly keep your questions as short as you possibly can. I'm looking at the question list, and there are many, many questions. So if you could try as hard as you can to try to keep it to maybe 30 seconds to a minute, that'll give everybody a chance to ask a question, and I'll try to keep my answers short, which is sometimes a problem for me too. So again, the way to ask a question, *3. And with that, Jackie, I'm going to turn it back to you, and we can go ahead with answering folks' questions.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. Before we go on live, there's several questions here that we received online regarding the Equality Act, H.R. 5, and safeguarding religious freedom. Can you speak to that, Congressman?
Sure. And first of all, the Equality Act, please write me, and I will send you about a 3-page summary that I've prepared to try to answer these questions, because with the Equality Act, I find that there's a heck of a lot of misinformation out there about what the Equality Act does or doesn't do. And I much prefer in these discussions to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what the facts are. Once we can all agree on the facts, then we can discuss and debate and agree or disagree on what to do about those facts. But the Equality Act is one of those that I just get a lot of questions about. So fundamentally what the Equality Act does, and this is H.R. 5, is to continue an effort in our country to prohibit discrimination against our fellow citizens based on their own conditions or exercising their own freedoms. And this is sometimes a difficult path, because sometimes we don't like who somebody else is or what they are saying, and yet we cannot go out and at least in the public sphere, discriminate against them on that basis. I think that's unfair to them. It's unfair to all of us at the end of the day. And so what the Equality Act does simply is to prohibit discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity in specific areas, including public accommodations and facilities, education, federal funding, housing, credit, and the jury system. Now, these prohibitions already exist in many states, including Hawaii, which probably has the most prohibitions among most of the states, because we have felt very strongly about prohibiting discrimination in our own society, given our own cultures, our own diversity, and our own beliefs. And so, in all likelihood, nothing in the Equality Act is going to significantly impact anybody in Hawaii, because it's already state law. But I think it is important that we try to standardize this across our entire country so that we are all playing by the same rules. I will just answer a few of the questions that I see here, and there are many. So again, I want to try to tick some of these off, and then anybody that asks me about the Equality Act, please follow up directly with me through case.house.gov. First of all, there's a frequent concern that schools, churches, and hospitals could be forced to accept the government's beliefs and mandates about sexual orientation and gender identity, and that's not the case. Religious organizations can, rightly or wrongly, can still, for the most part, limit participation in a wide array of activities to only members of their faith or beliefs. The one area where this is not true is in actual employment, where this Equality Act would in fact say you cannot discriminate on the basis of gender identity in employment by that place of worship, and so it does not affect the beliefs that one has or how you preach about those beliefs. In the same light, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was an effort back in 1993 to protect religious freedom, as the title indicates, is not repealed by that act, by the Equality Act. This still stands in place. One of the other concerns that's frequently brought up in the Equality Act is that somehow it would require doctors and medical professionals to engage in gender transition or abortion services. And the Equality Act does not do that. The Equality Act does not make a doctor do anything that he or she does not believe they should do. So there's a couple of other areas that are often raised in the Equality Act. One thing I would note is that a lot of times people frame the Equality Act as a deeply partisan issue, and the reality is that it did pass the U.S. House of Representatives on a bipartisan basis. It was supported by over 70 religious institutions around the country, and so it is not. I think it's incorrect to frame it as a purely partisan issue. It is controversial in many areas. This area is controversial. I did believe that on balance, the Equality Act was the correct framing, as I felt, of how to protect differences in our society fairly while preserving people's rights to believe what they want to believe. And so I did vote for the Equality Act. It is in the Senate right now. It is not at all sure that the Senate will, in fact, pass it. So I don't know where it's going to go in the Senate, but the House passed it by a significant majority. But please ask me any other questions about the Equality Act offline, and I'll try to get you those answers. Okay.
All right. We're going to go live with Victor. Victor, you have a question regarding vaccination.
Yes, Congressman Ed Case, you're doing a fine job, by the way. You're doing a great job. You should be president, but that's my opinion.
Thank you. Are you still there?
Oh, I think he went off.
I think he had a question. I don't think he meant to just say nice things about me without a question. So I'm sorry, Victor. If you're still there, chime in. Otherwise, we need to move on.
Yeah, he had a question about vaccination and if it's going to be open to everybody.
Okay. Yes, the answer is yes. Vaccinations are going to be open to everybody on a formal basis as of April 19th, according to our president, who has basically said that as of April 19th, all states should make vaccinations available to everybody who wants a vaccination. Now, just to be really, really clear, available doesn't mean you can go down and stand in line on April 20th and get a vaccination. Still need to go through the process of signing up. We do not have enough vaccination today to vaccinate everybody in the country on April 20th. However, the president felt comfortable in the manufacture and distribution of vaccinations throughout our country to set that deadline for the states in the belief that there would be sufficient vaccination to cover everybody who wants to get vaccinated by really the midsummer time frame. So you should already, if you're 50 or above in Hawaii, you're already eligible and or at high risk and other conditions. But as of a week from now, it should be open for everybody to at least get in line. And if you need any help, by the way, and kind of where to get a vaccination, you can contact my office. There's a central state line and website that you can go to that'll direct you in the right place. But our interest is in everybody getting vaccinated. And so we're going to do everything we can to help that effort.
All right, our next person we're going to have is Jennifer, and she has a question on student loan forgiveness. Jennifer, you're on.
Hi. Sorry, I was just distracted, but I want to thank you as well for the job that you're doing. I think I agree with Victor. But I did want to speak to student loan forgiveness because I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about wanting to have a $50,000 student loan forgiveness. So just a quick run through. When I graduated with my undergrad, I had $15,000 in loans. When I went back to school to get my graduate degree, I added $37,000 to that. So, and by then my other loans had grown. So at that time, when I graduated, I had $57,656. So I paid on those loans from the time that I got my first full-time job in 2010, steadily, like a lot, like $600 a month I paid on student loans or more. And, this is just, at this point, I'm just talking about my federal student loans. So private student loans aside. Reconsolidation in 2017 brought the total to $72,000. From that last reconsolidation, because I can't even tell you how many times these loans changed hands, either because I consolidated upon advice or because the servicer changed, they've actually gone up to $73,000. So that means since 2017, I paid $5,142, and my loans have actually grown by $1,473. So this is why we're talking about forgiveness, because even as you pay, you're unless you are paying like thousands, like at least $1,000 or $2,000 a month, you aren't even paying your interest. So, and
okay.
That's just an example.
Thank you so much, and Jennifer, and for your kind words. Student loan forgiveness is a critical problem for way too many folks around our country, including you, as you know, and it's simply not right that you would diligently try to pay off your debts and yet your debts would increase. That's not the way the world's supposed to work. There are several proposals in Congress right now on student loan forgiveness, and the President has also stepped forward to say what he thought we should be doing in terms of some student loan forgiveness. It's not at the level of your $73,000, but it's at least going to be a start. And I think we will pass some form of student loan forgiveness. For me, what I'm trying to sort through in terms of student loan forgiveness is that I want, and by the way, I guess if I'm using the word forgiveness, it could be a range of options. It could be allowing students to go to a lower market rate interest because they're locked in at high levels of student debt when they took on that debt. Whereas, as we all know, we have historically low levels of debt, and yet many students cannot get their debt down to market, which seems unfair to me. It could be that that payment plans are adjusted based on salary expectations over time. There's lots of ways to relieve the student loan burden, and some of it might include outright forgiveness. What I want to be careful about is that as I support student loan forgiveness, which is really the federal government paying for those student loans. So it is an expenditure by the federal government. It's not just the federal government decreeing that the loans are not collectible. They still are collectible. Somebody else is just taking care of the bill. That it's going to people that are truly in need, because in many professions, let's take the example of of a doctor who has a lot of student loans. Let's say many doctors come out of medical school with loans in hundreds of thousands of dollars, and yet they can pay them over time. So is that where I want to put your taxpayer money into that bucket? I don't think so. And yet, if there are folks that are in professions that are equally valuable, who have high levels of student debt, who really will not have the ability over the course of their career to retire those debts, well, those are the people I want to help. So I believe that we will do something in this area, and I think it's a critical area. I don't exactly know what it's going to look like yet. I think we're trying to sort through exactly what I just talked about right now. But thank you so much for your question, and good luck.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. The next person we have live is Bill, who has a question about, he is a bar owner. And go ahead, Bill. You're on.
Good evening,
Bill is
Mr.
from U
Case.
Valley.
How are you doing?
Hello, Bill.
I know it's a long ride because I used to be on the East Coast myself long ago, so it's a long trip from here. So I've had a very tough year. I have 4 live music bars in Honolulu. I have a management company that operates them. Ann O'Brien's, Irish Rose Saloon, O'Toole's, and Kelly O'Neill's. Since March 18th of last year, yes, I'm still there.
We lost Bill.
No, I'm
still there.
Yeah.
I'm still there, yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, okay, so all my bars have been closed since March 18th of last year, where we were told we'd be closed for 15 days. They closed us for 90.
Hello?
We opened. I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Jackie, I can hear you, Bill. Just go ahead. I'll text Jackie.
Okay, so anyways, the bars have been closed and had no income since July of last year, where the mayor and the governor told us we'd be closed for 15 days, and then we'd be closed for 3 weeks. We're still closed. I mean, Mr. Blangiardi opened us up in mid-March, but I can't open my bars because I have no income. I haven't had income since last July 30th. I used the PPP the first time around, and I fully expended it by June 30th. I don't know how I can get by with it, no income at all. So I was awaiting the shuttered venues grant, and we were told about it in October and November, and I was waiting for it and hoping for it in January. And it got pushed all the way back to April. And in that time period, you couldn't apply for the PPP as well. So I have no funds at all. I mean, nothing.
Wait, what happened?
So as it comes about, now I get to the shuttered venues grant, and they say, okay, well, you're not going to be qualified for that because your bars don't have fixed seating and you don't have covered charges every single night. So all of a sudden I'm excluded from that. And I can't go back to the PPP. Hopefully I could, but I haven't had an employee. 80 employees and 100 musicians have been gone since July 30th. So now I'm told, hey, there's an American Revitalization Plan. That might be out in May, and it might come out in June that you actually get funds. How do I know that I won't be disqualified by that time? Because that's what's happening in all these things. I go all the way through to the end, and then I'm disqualified. Meantime, I have no money, have no income, and no means to provide jobs for those 80 people or the 100 musicians or provide live music to Honolulu, which I've done for 23 years. It's a very struggling thing. How do I know that American Revitalization Plan is going to work for me?
Thank you so much, Bill. You and I have communicated on your situation and you have communicated with my office for the better part of the last year. And first of all, I'm so sorry at the situation that you have faced. It is not fair. It is not right. It is really, in all honesty, one of the worst situations that I have heard throughout a very long and difficult year with a lot of worse in it. We have tried very hard to work with you to figure out how we can tap you into federal support, and you're right. We have not been able to fit you into the new shuttered venue operator program for very obscure reasons that madden me. In all honesty, you should be eligible for it. We have tried to do it from the restaurant a support program as well. You have been at least eligible for PPP, but as you point out, PPP is an employee maintenance program in large part. And I'm still trying to find the right direction to steer you in terms of federal support. And so it's been a long and very difficult and discouraging process for you, for sure, and for me in my office, because you should be able to get some support. We'll keep trying. Clearly, the state and the county governments have $2.2 billion discretionary to be able to help people that have fallen through the cracks of federal support, especially in some of our travel and tourism industry. I'm sure that there are, for example, wedding operators on the phone who have found themselves in much the same situation where none of these federal laws exactly fit their situation. That's been frustrating. But we are trying to also encourage our state and county governments to assist folks who are not getting the kind of assistance that they need, at least from these federal programs. So all I can say to you for now is I really apologize that we have not found a way to cover you yet. We'll try and stay in touch. I can't offer you any more right now.
I would like to commend your staff.
Okay. All right, Bill. Well, I think you got kicked off. So thank you for that last comment, which I think was commending my staff, and I'm proud of my staff too. And many of you've gotten to know them throughout the last year. Okay, Jackie, are you back on?
Yep, I'm back on. All right, we're gonna go live with Heidi. She's concerned about unemployment claims being processed. Heidi, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Okay, so yeah,
All right,
I'm Heidi from Eva Beach, and my husband is a Navy veteran, and I'm concerned that the impact COVID-19 has had on our unemployment office and their ability to process claims. So I have pending unemployment claims dating back to August when our children went back to school virtually, and I've had to stay home to be their second teacher at home. And I know there's another program to assist financially, but to qualify for that, you have to get denied unemployment. And with all these pending claims, there's no way to qualify for something else. So what can be done to help our unemployment office to process all these back claims?
What can be done straight and short and sweet is that the state can boost up the number of folks that are assigned to the unemployment office to be able to process the claims. There have been two problems right from the get-go with unemployment. As I noted earlier, unemployment is not a federal program. It's a state program that the federal government assists with, but it is provided for and run by states with assistance from the federal government. And the problem from the get-go has been that in Hawaii, our unemployment office was absolutely swamped with claims where we went from the lowest unemployment rate in the country to the highest unemployment rate inside of a few months. They weren't prepared for that. They had a 30-year-old computer that couldn't process the claims. They didn't have enough people in the state unemployment office to process the claims. The so-called normal claims, the claims that are pretty straightforward, those have been processed fairly easily. The hang-up has been when there's any kind of a question on whether folks had work availability elsewhere, and sometimes tragically, when folks just went back to work for a few days to just make ends meet, that raises a question in the unemployment office, and they've got to throw a person at it as opposed to a pretty straightforward process. And so the frustration from my perspective has been tens of thousands of folks like you who have not been getting good answers even to their unemployment claims, much less an expedited processing. Now, there's good people in the unemployment office that have been trying very, very hard over the last year to stay up with it. I visited their processing center not 2 weeks ago, and I was home. I talked with many of them. They care very much about this, but they are still overwhelmed. And so the number one thing that you can do is contact your state legislators and urge them to increase the amount of funds that are allocated to processing unemployment claims. You can contact my office, but I don't have I'm not the decision maker on it. We have been able to help some folks in at least getting answers to their claims, and so you're welcome to do that. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's still going to come down to some of the logistics that they're facing which is no good answer at all, but I'm just trying to be straight with you about what's actually going on in unemployment. It has been, I will say, it has been, in the last year, one of my biggest disappointments is the difficulty in getting unemployment benefits, state and federal, to people that are desperately in need of them. So it is, so there's such a dire need for it.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Congressman, the next person we have here is Leonard from Foster Village, and his question is about the missile defense from Korea. Leonard, are you there?
I am here. This question relates to the bucket that you identified as bucket 2. The question is, what will you do to provide defense against North Korean missiles which can now reach Hawaii?
Well, thank you for that question. It's very topical because our military defense agency, the MDA, in conjunction with our military in Hawaii, the Indo-Pacific Command, and outgoing Admiral Davidson, advocate for a state-of-the-art radar here in Hawaii, which is referred to as the HDR-H, the High Discrimination Radar Hawaii, which is a kind of the next-gen radar that can actually detect missiles very, very early, coming out of Asia in particular. It is definitely a response to North Korea's acceleration on its ballistic missiles. And that HDR-H is actually very topical because the military has proposed a couple of sites for the HDR-H, which is a multi-billion-dollar project, which I am trying to help in the Appropriations Committee, including an appropriation last year of $130 million. $1 million. I'm sorry, I just had to make sure I had my zeros straight. To continue the development of the HDR-H. And if you want to comment on that, the military environmental impact statement is open right now for public comment. The site choices are Kahuku on this island, and the most likely site, in all honesty, is the Pacific Missile Range facility on Kauai. There are also similar radars that need to be developed out in the Western Pacific, in particular in Guam. And so that's my response on North Korea missiles.
Those will identify incoming missiles, but what will we do if we identify that some are coming in?
There's a whole other parallel path which has to do with the next state of the art in terms of actually shooting those missiles down once identified. And you may have seen in the paper about 4 months ago, I think it was, there was a test of a missile system in which a missile was fired. I think it was from Alaska, and was essentially knocked out of the sky by a missile from Kwajalein, I think it was. And so anyway, the test demonstrated that we had very high capacity to intercept missiles at North Korea, but you've got to see them before you know what to shoot at. And I wish we didn't have to have this conversation, but the fact of the matter is that when we have a bad country, as is North Korea, which is not being responsive to any kind of international effort to get them to control a ballistic missile capacity, including a nuclear development, you have to take precautions. You can't just let it go. And so we're forced to these decisions. Hey, Jackie?
Yes.
What I'm going to do is for about 5 minutes, because we're moving a little too slow. I see a lot of questions on my screen that are write-in questions. So I'm going to try to do speed answers here, and see if that works for a little while. And I hope to reach a few of these, and then obviously I will try to respond to everybody that we didn't get to. So I'm just going to whip it for a little while, so bear with me. What do you feel about vaccine passports? I think that this is more accurately talked about vaccine certifications. Passports kind of implies that it's, somehow related to travel, although it could be. I think that the reality is that when everybody has the ability to get the vaccine, and we are down to the point where nobody can say, well, I never got a chance to get the vaccine, And when we get to a certain level of more mass vaccination, I think it's inescapable that we're going to have to start to distinguish in some places under some fair circumstances as to folks that have been vaccinated. A perfect example of that would be some form of education, as an example. It could well be travel too, because I think many of us are familiar with the days when we actually did carry a vaccine card for things like yellow fever, and that was a condition of getting into a country. So I think it's inevitable that we're going to have to start to distinguish a little bit more in some really key areas where it's reasonable to do so in terms of whether you have or have not been vaccinated. Can I do anything to preserve the Hawaii Tourism Authority? It's directly a state issue. I support the Hawaii Tourism Authority. I see that they're under threat in the state legislature. It's not directly my kuleana, as I say. I have said publicly that I support them. I worked in the tourism industry myself and believe in the Hawaii Tourism Authority and don't want them to go away. But I'm not the decision maker on that. Let's see. Is there a way to fix the logistics booking of correctional facilities? I'm not sure I understand that question. So if you could write my office and spell it out a little bit more, we'll try to answer you. What is the plan for relief for landlords regarding rent assistance? There is, as I understand it, well, first of all, in terms of the recent American Rescue Plan, there is some relief for landlords in the American Rescue Plan that was just passed, and you can get details from my office. You're also, of course, eligible for PPP, for the small business assistance. If you haven't taken advantage of that already, you should. If you're a business landlord with employees, which many are. And then finally, you certainly, I believe it's only fair that if a renter is getting assistance, that renter should share that assistance with the landlord. You can't get the assistance and then stiff your landlord. And so I think landlords can fairly ask for that rental assistance from their renters. Also, the state and county governments in the past have run some of their COVID-19 funds in a way to help landlords, and they may be making some of those decisions right now. Let's see. Is there a coalition for term limits, restrict bills to single issues, military budget? I got to say no on term limits. I support term limits, especially on the state level. I'm a little less focused on term limits coming from a small state like Hawaii, where seniority does matter in terms of equalizing thing for a small state. I'm in my 5th term in Congress, and if I had termed out, last year or this year for that matter, I would not have been able to exert the seniority that I now am on committees like appropriations for the benefit of Hawaii. So I'm a little, I would go that direction if everybody else in Congress wanted to go. I support them in principle, but it is a problem for a small state like Hawaii. Let's see. Let's see. Rail is the boss right now. Rail is the boss right now. It's a right fit for the project to continue forward. Well, that decision on HART is very much one for the city and county of Honolulu and HART to pursue. Right now, of course, HART is trying to develop a realistic budget going forward. I commend the new director, Ms. Kaikina, in terms of her honesty and her transparency. I think she's trying to tell it like it is. It's a tough message to hear. The choices are very, very tough. My focus is that if and as Hawaii decides to proceed with HART in whatever way, shape, or form, I'm going to try to make sure that the federal funding is there to assist. It's not going to be the panacea to bail HART out. There still have to be very tough decisions on HART. But the least that we need at the federal level for me to do that is a very, very honest, transparent, reasonable, and credible plan for completing rail, however it's going to be completed. Otherwise, our federal government's going to lose faith in the project. Let's see. Has Rep. Ed Case read the recent CBO review of single-payer healthcare, which details reduced organizational spending by a single-payer healthcare system? Why is he opposing Medicare for all? Mr. Miller, we've talked about this many times. Yes, I have read the recent CBO review. I think it's a little less simple than you're portraying it here. I think that there are parts of that CBO report that give a more nuanced view than the conclusion that you've reached here. And as for Medicare for all, I think we've discussed this on many occasions. I guess my first question is exactly what do you mean by Medicare for all? Because I hear a lot of different things about what it means. But if it means essentially replacing our current healthcare system with Medicare, I'm not in favor of that. I don't believe that our healthcare system is all bad. And I believe that there are major flaws with it. I believe very much in, for example, controlling prescription drug costs. I believe very much in no discrimination of people with pre-existing conditions. I believe in expanding Obamacare, the current program, to cover even more folks with either affordable private health care insurance and or the government marketplace. And I also believe in a public option. So you have convinced me of that from our discussions. I do believe that people should at least be able to choose a little earlier than Medicare eligible age as to whether to choose Medicare for your primary health insurance as opposed to staying with your private health care insurance. And so I'm on board on the public option, which is a little bit of a shift for me. So I have listened, but I'm not all the way to, I think, where you are on Medicare for all. Is it possible for offices to be open longer hours? I'm not aware of any limitation, Joanna, on the state law at least, or federal law for that matter, restricting office hours. I think that the limitations in the COVID-19 categories and tiers by the city and county of Honolulu, I don't think that they have office restrictions. They certainly have things like, how many people can be in an office. I may be wrong on that, but it's not a federal government function. It's a city and county of Honolulu, and of course each county gets to set those tiers and those conditions. Let's see. Congressman Neal from Massachusetts is proposing H.R. 2337. Will you support this bill? I got to look that one up, David. I don't know what that bill is off the top of my head. We have thousands of bills, so I just don't know which it is. Are you aware that prior to October it was regular flu data manipulated since October? I'm not following that question, Rebecca. I'm aware that some people think that somehow the data on COVID-19 was manipulated. I don't have that view. I think that our public health officials have tried to be pretty straight on what's happening with COVID-19 and why it's happening. Sometimes it's very, very hard to tell exactly what is happening. It's not a static, virus or disease. It moves a lot. We've obviously seen variants that perhaps we didn't expect in the very beginning. And so I guess I'm not, if that's what you're referring to, I'm aware of the claim, but I don't think it's a credible claim. But if you're thinking about something else, write me and I'll try to respond to you. Where are we on the Jones Act? I've introduced 3 bills to reform the Jones Act. They're sitting in Congress, very, very powerful opposition. I'm not sure how much immediate headway I'm going to make, but I certainly have gotten people like you to ask that question at least, and I think that that's an achievement that a lot more people understand the real damage that the Jones Act is doing to our Hawaii and to our cost of living by having an essential monopoly on our shipping lanes. And so I'm going to keep talking and fighting on that issue. Being in a pandemic, why is the president allowing the border to be open? Actually, the border is, as I just discovered in the last 2 days, it's a little bit of a mix right now. The border is still largely closed to, for example, visas from Mexico or from Central American countries. You cannot travel, legally, for the most part, legally to our country. because of COVID-19, the so-called Title 42 set of restrictions. You also, of course, both before COVID-19 and currently cannot enter our country illegally, or at least it's illegal to do that. The problem there is enforcing that and securing our border. What you may be referring to is President Biden's decision to retain in our country unaccompanied minor children who come in, and children with families under 6. And there's some very difficult reasons why he's made that decision. I think that decision is a tough decision. He went a different direction from President Trump on it, and I think we need to evaluate whether that is exactly the right thing to do as part of larger immigration reform. Infrastructure bill, no real question on the infrastructure bill, but I spoke to it early on. We're developing it right now, trying to make the right decisions on the infrastructure bill. Could have a major benefit for Hawaii. For me, one of the critical issues on the infrastructure bill is where is that money going to go? Is going to be paid efficiently and in a way that will really help our infrastructure and our economy, but also what's the best way to pay for that bill? Because we have borrowed from all of us and our next generations somewhere in the range of $5 trillion in the last year plus to get ourselves through COVID-19. And we can't continue to ratchet up our debt and deficits indefinitely. And so there's got to be some payment for that level of infrastructure bill, which is not directly related to COVID emergency assistance. See. Can I provide insight, military, can I provide insight on preserving our aquifer? I think that's referring to Red Hill. I've definitely continued to be in very, very close contact all around with our military to emphasize the critical importance of securing Red Hill. The military is currently in a contested case hearing as to whether they can continue to operate Red Hill, and that's ongoing as we speak right now. Independently, the military is doing what your congressional delegation has required them really to do, and that is to continue to develop a secondary containment approach under which there would be essentially a double liner. We have tried to fund research on that specifically to the University of Hawaii to get that done. The military thinks it may be getting somewhere on that. I'm reserving judgment until I see exactly what they come up with. But in the meantime, it is very, very much a matter of state-of-the-art testing, state-of-the-art prevention, of getting to the next generations of protection, and of course, requiring the military to go through the same legal requirements as anybody else would have to go to operate a facility of that importance and of that potential risk to our country. Let's see, where are we? Let me do a few more. Is the Congressman aware that the U.S. Army is blocking access to Waipahu? We cannot get across, and will they bring that back? I am not sure what this is referring to. Access to Waipahu. I think the honest answer to your question is no, I'm not aware of that. So if you want me to take a look at that, let me know. Do you see any hope of banning assault rifles? I'm a strong supporter of many of the anti-gun violence provisions, whether they be enhanced background checks or banning assault rifles so rifles that really have no purpose being widely held throughout our country. They're not for recreational use. They're not needed for protection. So we're not talking about less lethal firearms, which I think can reasonably and should reasonably be owned and utilized by private citizens acting responsibly. So this is not a matter of shutting down gun ownership, but it is a matter of saying assault rifles themselves and comparable accessories such as bump stock, high capacity magazines really don't have a place, especially considering the risk that they present. in the wrong hands. And so we have passed out of the House in the last few weeks our assault rifle provisions all over again. They are sitting in the U.S. Senate, 3 gun violence pieces of legislation widely supported by the American people. And I hope that they move in the U.S. Senate, but it's an uphill battle. The gun lobby is very, very heavily entrenched, especially in the Senate. Did I read H.R. 1? Yes, I did read H.R. 1. I co-introduced H.R. 1. You're observing that the whole bill is presented is presenting different information. Well, one of my problems generally with the public discussion sometimes is that somebody decides to put out misinformation on something that's just factually inaccurate, and people form opinions on that. And I suspect that that's happened with H.R. 1, but I'm happy to try to answer your questions on it factually and honestly. Let's see, does H.R. 1 legalize ballot harvesting? I don't believe H.R. 1 does legalize ballot harvesting, but I can double check if you want to follow up with me. Is there a place in the Blue Pacific Act for ocean safety tourism? I agree with the importance of ocean safety tourism, and yes, the Blue Pacific Act does provide for assistance to the countries of the Pacific in economic development, so it could well be used to develop their tourism industries along ocean safety lines. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to defer back to Jackie because I've been going on these individual questions for a while. So for those that I didn't quite get to, I apologize, but let's go back, Jackie, to live questions.
All right, let's go with Cheryl here. Cheryl is from Millie Lonnie, and she has a question.
Congressman, I really wanted to thank you for looking out for us little folks, and I know that you're under tremendous pressure from all the political forces up there. President Biden's plans have tremendous opportunity to be as great as FDR's changes to our country, and I want to encourage you to have the fortitude to stand firm with all the pressure that's going to be on you as this moves through Congress. I wanted to ask, and it's probably not possible since 4 years have passed, but is there any way that the Trans-Pacific Partnership could come back in some form, because it was so good for our American farmers and businesses? And I realize there's a lot that has changed in the last 4 years, but I didn't know the answer to that, and I wondered if you knew. Yeah.
Thank you, Cheryl. Nothing has changed that significantly in the last 4 years. I support the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was essentially a trade agreement among the countries of the Pacific, and especially of the Pacific Rim. So countries such as the United States and Japan and the Republic of Korea and Australia and New Zealand and Singapore. And I believe that the TPP was a very productive initiative by President Obama that was good for our country and good for our Hawaii, by the way, because as we enhance trade across the Pacific, our Hawaii benefits. Much of that trade is done or is related to Hawaii, and so when we can facilitate increased trade in the Pacific, we help not only our country but our Hawaii. President Trump felt that the TPP was not good for our country. I disagreed with him, and I hope it does come back. President Biden has already started discussions that would lead to not exactly the TPP, but something like it, and I'm very encouraging of that.
And I wanted to thank you and encourage you. Thank you for your service to our country and encourage you in your work. Thank you so much, Congressman.
I appreciate that.
All right, Congressman, I'm going to take questions from the online questions here, and this one's from Mary. Why is DeJoy still postmaster?
He's postmaster because he is accountable to the U.S. Postal Service Board of Governors. The Board of Governors was set up in the Postal Service reforms that made the U.S. Postal Service somewhat independent of Congress and for that matter, the President. And so it's a different leadership structure, and Congress does not have a direct role, nor for that matter does the President. One of the problems with the Board of Governors has been that it has not been operating at full complement. President Biden has now nominated new folks to come onto the board. The board should be at full complement very soon, and presumably that board is going to take up the question of whether to continue Postmaster General DeJoy or not. But that's why he hasn't been. Sometimes people ask me, why don't you impeach him or why don't you remove him? And the fact of the matter is his accountability is to the Board of Governors.
All right, we're going to go live with Jim from Honolulu. His question is concerned about environmental pollution. Jim, are you there?
Well, let me just answer his question. Jim, I share your great concern about environmental pollution. We could take this from a lot of different angles. We've got clearly we've got pollution rampant in all parts of our environment, whether it be our air or our land or our sea. Our laws try to deal with each aspect of environmental pollution. We've got good solid laws that, in all honesty, folks have been trying to reverse or to weaken over the last few years, and our job is to re-strengthen them and to expand upon them. The Clean Air Act, for example, was a revolutionary act that is decades old now, and we forget sometimes how successful that law actually was in terms of cleaning up our air. To compare air in the Los Angeles basin in the 60s and the 70s against today is like almost literally night and day. And so we've got to strengthen these. The area that I'm particularly concerned about, going back to the oceans, is environmental pollution into our oceans from non-point source pollution. So in other words, land runoff, and or climate change related, which changes the chemistry of our oceans, which is environmental pollution, or trash going into our oceans, which we see every day on our shorelines. So I share your concerns, and that's a primary subject of my focus on the U.S. House Natural Resources Committee, which is responsible for our environmental laws throughout our country.
All right. The next person we have is Jorgen. Are you there, Jorgen?
Yes, hi.
My name
Yes, Congressman, I think you're the only elected official I would vote for again. Thank you very much for your service. But I'm concerned about international tourism, not only to Hawaii, but to the United States. Our borders are still closed in any direction. When do you see this, and how do you see this changed safely, that international travel can resume also to the United States?
Well, I think you know better than I do, because you're in the business, that this is kind of a two-way street. It's not only our borders, but it's also borders for returning travelers. And in some cases, those borders are even more severely closed than ours are. I would think, to answer your question, that once we get in our country to a little bit farther along in terms of the level of vaccination, and if that other country also gets to that point, I think we would start to see some of those international barriers come down fairly quickly. The one that, of course, we're always concerned about in Hawaii in particular is Japan. And Japan, of course, has had a very significant COVID scare and issue, just as we have. They have precautions in Japan that are in some ways more strict than ours, and so their folks are not going to come visit us, even if our borders are open, if they can't get back into their own country. So it's got to kind of happen both ways. We see some of this developing in some of the countries that are developing so-called travel bubbles, Taiwan and Palau being one example out there, where those two countries have determined that there's an acceptable risk that they can manage as between each other, and they've got the right protocols in place to at least start it up again. So I think that that's what it's going to take in the midterm. In the long term, it does come down to a level of comfort resulting from mass vaccination on both sides of the ocean.
All right, Congressman, we have Celeste on next, and she has a question regarding the state of Hawaii and families that have elderly parents. Celeste, are you on?
Ed Case, I'm calling from Pearl City, Hawaii. My question is, I have a 95-year-old mother that is in an independent care home. So ever since the COVID started, for us, the family, they stopped us from visiting. We understand because they're elderly, but do you know when the state of Hawaii is going to open up so then we can see her again? Because the only thing that we get to do is talk to her, and I ended up purchasing an iPad to just let her see us and talk to us. But do you know when that the state's going to let us visit her once we get the COVID, the shot and all that? Do you have any information?
Thank you so much, Celeste. First of all, I understand what you say about your elderly parents. My father just celebrated his 101st birthday last weekend, and I was able to see him because he is not in a care home. He's lucky to be able to live at home. My mother is 93, and so I do understand. Although I must say I have not had to go through what you've had to go through in terms of that degree of isolation from your mother over the last year. We're happy to look into it. I don't recall, and I don't believe that the limitation on visitations to independent care homes is a statewide prohibition. I think that the independent care homes, to some extent, have some discretion. And again, I would go back to the point that if a care home, the CDC guidelines provide that people that are both vaccinated can, in fact, sit down and talk story with each other personally, and even without a mask. Those are specific scientific CDC guidelines. And so it seems to me that if your independent care home is widely vaccinated, as is your family, that there should be some safe zone in which you should be able to physically spend time with your mother. So I'm not sure that the state is the one that's saying you can't do that. I think it may be a care home policy, but I'm happy to look into it for you. I'd like to know the answer myself.
Oh, that's great, because I know she keeps asking when are we going to go and visit her, and I told her I need to get this shot yet. I mean, I'm thankful this coming Wednesday I'm going to get my first shot, but then at least I want to know what is my rights about this.
I think, in all honesty, I think that the independent care home, because they have highly at-risk people in their care living in a congregate facility. And we've seen in spades that can result in very tragic consequences. We saw that at the Yukio-Kutsu Veterans Home in Hilo, where COVID-19 got away from them in that care home, and 26, 27 veterans died there. And so I think the independent care home is probably going to say to you, we can't do that until you are vaccinated, but we probably can if you are vaccinated. I guess that's the answer, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, well, good luck.
Thank you.
All right, Congressman, we have 5 more minutes before 8 o'clock. Would you like to take another question before?
No, I think if it's okay, Jackie, I see some questions here that are standing in line, and so I'm going to go back to my speed answers if that's okay. And I apologize to folks that you can't ask me personally, but I'm going to run out of time in 4 minutes. And so let me just try to ask this through. Overall, how do you think the U.S. is doing, specifically looking and looting and rioting, overspending, or worrying him? He wants to know what your thoughts are about this. Here's what I think. I think the United States remains an incredible country a strong country, a vital country, a country of leadership, and a country that is still admired around the world. But I think we have not faced up to so many of our challenges, and we are unfortunately mired in a period of great division, of great dysfunction, of great polarization, even of great misinformation, where we are not even talking off a standard agreed set of facts. And so we are, in some cases, in many ways, we are being our own worst enemy right now. And I think we've got to get away from that. I think we have to start talking to each other again. That's an acquired art sometimes. I think we have to start compromising with each other again where we can. I think we have to start trying to celebrate our successes and face up to our failures. And I think if we do that, we're just fine. So I haven't lost inherent faith in our country. I certainly am discouraged at times over the division and lack of productivity and failure to confront challenges where we kick things down the road, like you say, overspending and the root causes of looting and rioting. Those are two good examples. But I don't think any of us should succumb to the view of many out there, or some at least, that somehow the United States is in decline. I don't believe that. Let's see. A lot of businesses are having a hard time hiring because people are making a lot of money with UI and stimulus checks. How do we help employers? I agree with this. In some ways, in some places, and I've certainly heard this anecdotally, that in many cases, some employees feel that they're better off staying on unemployment and with their stimulus checks. I don't think that's a widespread view, but it is nonetheless a problem, and we do want to help our employers through such programs as PPP, which require employees to stay with employers for the employers to get the PPP, and they're not supposed to be on unemployment if there's a ready job there. So there's lots of assistance we can give to employers, but the one thing I would say is that the supplemented UI and stimulus checks aren't going to go on forever, and so the situation where there might be some inequality in terms of folks feeling they're better off not going back to work, that's not going to last. I am very unfortunately out of time. I see that I didn't quite get through all of them. I see about 10 or 15 left here, some of which I've already answered. But I just want to ask everybody that had a question that wants me to answer it to, again, contact me at case.house.gov. With that, on behalf of my entire staff, some of whom are with me here in D.C. at 2 o'clock in the morning, and Jackie Conant, my Deputy Chief of Staff in Honolulu, and several of my staff on the call, and really all of my staff in both D.C. and Honolulu. I thank you for spending the time with me tonight. Again, my goal here is to keep you informed, tell you what I'm doing, listen to you, listen to your questions. I've learned a lot in this talk story. I hope that I have my marching orders from you, and I very, very much encourage you to stay in touch with me through case.house.gov. And so with that, from Washington, D.C. and Capitol Hill, Congressman Ed Case here signing off. Be safe and be well. Mahalo.